Hey there. I recently got another U.S. military pocket knife from World War II or thereabouts to add to my collection of the same. It is a U.S. Army Signal Corps TL-11, and this one's by Camillus. But before I tell you about the knife, just quickly, the U.S. Army Signal Corps, if you're not familiar, this is from Wikipedia, is a branch of the U.S. Army that creates and manages communications and information systems for the command and control of combined armed forces. So they play a really important role and have been around a long time. They were established all the way back in 1860 and apparently played an important role even as far back as the Civil War. So here are a couple of images of the Signal Corps over time. The first one is from World War I, and it's the Signal Corps Aeronautical Division. So apparently they rode in hot air balloons back then and maybe flew around in wood spar and canvas biplanes. And it's amazing to think that that was just a little over 100 years ago. The next is a Signal Corpsman from World War II. And then finally, here's a image of the Signal Corps coat of arms. So the Signal Corps TL, or Tool for Lineman 11, is really just a little pocket knife. It's a swell end, two-bladed, easy open jackknife. And this one is by Camillus. And here on the escutcheon plate you can see SC U.S.A. TL-11, Signal Corps U.S. Army Tool for Lineman 11. And this one appears to have ebony wood covers. Does have brass pins and liners, I noticed, so it may not be from those years of the war, 1942 through 44, where brass was being requisitioned for other needs. Nickel silver bolster and cap. And yeah, two blades. You've got a large spear point blade with a long nail pull, deep swedge on both sides. It does have a half stop. And then a smaller pen blade, spear point, also with half stops. This knife has good action. So I think most of us are familiar with Tool for Lineman 29s, TL-29s, the electrician's knives that you see so often from World War II. And they were bigger, and they carried a large spear point blade, as well as that long screwdriver with a notch here and a sharpened edge over here for stripping wires. Now this blade actually locked with a brass liner lock. But yeah, you see these fairly often, maybe not as often with the escutcheon inlaid there into the wood handles. But I was not really that familiar with these. And I think the reason they really weren't on my radar is that I try to collect World War II military pocket knives, and in Michael Silvey's book, The Complete Book of U.S. Military Pocket Knives, he has this very knife on page 66, but under World War I. So he's got this as a World War I military pocket knife, and I really don't see how that's possible, because mine and his example in the book carry the 4-line Camillus Tang Stamp, which according to Goines' Encyclopedia of Cutlery Markings was used from 1941 to 1946, and that's pretty certain. So while he may have it under World War I, he does say in the book that these knives could either be during World War I, before, or after. It's not often really clear. I think it's pretty clear that this was made at least during the early part of World War II. Not to say that they weren't used in World War I, but this one in particular, with that Tang stamp, was probably from like 1941 or so, and fits into my collection really well. Also, just interestingly, in this book, I want to show you that the Signal Corps also had a 3-bladed cattleman's knife that they used. And of course they had an earlier version of the TL29, an electrician's knife with a long screwdriver here with 2 notches in it, and more of a slender frame. So there were several different tool for lineman knives before World War II. Some other makers of this TL11 were Keen Cutter, Miller Brothers, and Empire Winstead. So I'll show you the Tang stamps on this knife. First of all, on the main blade, you don't see Camillus. What you do see is sword brand. So this was Camillus, one of Camillus's brands, and the images of 2 crossed swords. There you can kind of see the handles up on the upper right and left corners there of the crossed swords, and then it reads sword above and brand below. And usually when you see that, it's on the reverse side that you see the Camillus Tang stamp, but here it's blank. And you see the Camillus Tang stamp on the small pen blade. And it is that 4-line Tang stamp. So that really helps us date this knife. This knife's in okay shape. The action's really good on it. It's got a snappy action. It's got nice half stops. But both of the blades are a little short. When I got it, this one, this tip was pointing up, which is kind of a common thing on these easy open jacks if people over sharpen them. And I was able to bring the top down enough to get that point so it doesn't snag there. And the small blade was actually supposed to be a spear point like that, but it was actually had been broken and then made to like a, I don't know, like a drop point or maybe even like a spay blade. I'll show you a picture from the listing maybe of how it looked when I got it. So I was able to bring that back down to a proper spear point shape. And it also had a point that stuck up and snagged, and now that I brought the top down, it does not. By the way, if you have a blade with a broken tip and you want to reprofile it, always bring the top down if you can. Don't just bring the bottom up, because if you bring the bottom up, you run the risk of having the tip of the blade above the well where it can actually snag and cut people. So if you typically you can bring the top down. Sure makes it easier to sharpen later, but even if you need to bring the bottom up, you know, to get a spear point, try to meet in the middle. Also on this knife, we had a couple of pieces missing. A piece of the wood was missing right here, and a piece of the wood was missing right here, so those are patches. You can see it does have a pin crack here, and a rather nasty crack right here, which I attempted to stabilize by squeezing some epoxy down in there. But I did sand the covers lightly and then oiled them, and that really helped, particularly the back, which really looked poor. It didn't really even quite match. I don't know what it is about old pocket knives, but a lot of times the back cover will be in a lot worse shape than the front. And I imagine that's from it laying on something that reacts with the wood for many, many years. You know, stored poorly. Maybe even it could have been down in water or something. But this one was much lighter, and I was able to get it back. So, you know, ebony does have color to it, and it often can be brown. And here you can see some grain to the wood, but I was able to get it so it looks a little more like the front. But the knife's not been taken apart or rebuilt or tampered with or anything like that, so it's all original. Again, a couple little patches right here and here, but I think it makes it look very presentable. I already made a brief comparison of this knife to the TL29, but here they are again side by side. And you can see the TL29 is a much larger knife. It's actually only about a eighth of an inch longer. This is a 3 3/4 inch knife, and this is 3 5/8 inch in the closed position. But it just seems like a bigger, heavier knife. It is much wider. Of course, it looks bigger with the bail too. But just a very different knife. Probably more similar to compare to would be this World War II Navy utility knife, because it's also a two-bladed, easy open jack. And this one also happens to be by Camillus. So they're kind of similar, but there are a lot of differences too. And I guess the first thing you can see here is, the covers are different, bone versus wood. There's no shield here. This one does have a bail, but this is a smaller knife too. This one is 3 3/8, and the TL11 again is 3 5/8. This one also doesn't have brass, as you can see, so that probably dates it from those years, 1942, 43, 44. This one has that boat tail frame, so it has a tapered cap here, and this cap is more just rounded. And the bolster is more squarish. This has a nice rounded bolster. This one is the kind of a square tapered bolster. I would say even the easy open cutout on the TL11 is much larger than the Navy utility knife. And the blades are quite different too. I mean, they're both spear point blades, but you can see that the TL11 is much broader, and it is got that deep cut swedge with the long nail pull. Now both knives have the same Camillus Tang stamp. It appears on the pen blade here, but the main blade here. But here's another look at it. So it's that same 4-line Camillus Tang stamp that ran from 1941 to 46. So yeah, a little lesser known TL11. Really interesting knife. I like it. I like these little easy open jacks. I've always kind of wanted one in ebony like that, so now I've killed two birds with one stone. Thanks for watching, and have fun collecting.